The moment did not arrive with fanfare. There were no flashing headlines announcing it, no sudden reveal staged for public shock value, no carefully timed television special designed to shape perception. Instead, it emerged slowly, almost quietly, through fragment of attention, scattered interviews, archival footage, and a lingering curiosity that followed a name long familiar to audiences who grew up watching a different era of television. Robert Conrad was gone from the stage, but what remained behind him was something far more complex than nostalgia. It was legacy and the silent weight of everything built around it. Because as the public turned its attention back to his story, a different narrative began to surface beneath the surface-level memories of action roles and television fame. It wasn't just about the man audiences thought they knew. The fearless screen presence, the rugged charisma, the unmistakable voice that once defined primetime entertainment. It was about what had been constructed quietly around that image over decades. Assets accumulated during peak fame, royalties that continued flowing long after the cameras stopped rolling, contracts, residual structures, and financial decisions made in an industry where success often translates into long-term, compounding wealth. And when observers began tracing those threads, the scale of it became difficult to ignore. Inside industry circles, it was never spoken of loudly. It didn't need to be. Wealth of this kind doesn't announce itself. It compounds in silence. Residual payments from syndicated series, international reruns that continue to circulate across generations, licensing agreements that outlive the original production by decades. Each layer added another dimension to a financial structure that, from the outside, most people never see. And for someone like Robert Conrad, whose career spanned some of television's most commercially resilient decades, the foundation was stronger than most ever realized. But the more attention turned toward his estate, the more the narrative shifted from individual success to generational consequence. Families built around entertainment legacies often inherit more than money. They inherit complexity, legal structures designed to preserve wealth, trust designed to protect it, and administrative frameworks that continue operating long after the public spotlight fades. What looked like simple riches from the outside was actually a deeply layered system of preservation, management, and continuity. And within that system, every decision mattered. Because behind the headlines that casually reference family wealth beyond imagination, there are real mechanisms at work: estate planning strategies, intellectual property rights, and long-standing agreements that continue generating value even in absence. For Robert Conrad's family, this wasn't just inheritance. It was infrastructure, a quiet financial ecosystem built over years of consistent earnings, industry longevity, and carefully maintained rights to creative work that never stopped circulating. As time passed, the public perception began to shift again. What once looked like simple celebrity fortunes started to resemble something more enduring, a legacy economy built not on sudden fortune but on sustained relevance. Each rerun, each licensing deal, each preserved piece of intellectual property added another layer to a structure that continued functioning almost independently of attention. And yet, despite the scale of it all, there was no spectacle, no public unveiling of accounts, no dramatic disclosure, just a slow realization that some careers do not end when the final scene fades. They continue operating in the background, quietly shaping the financial future of those connected to them. Because in the world of entertainment legacy, wealth is rarely a single moment. It is a continuation. And for Robert Conrad's family, that continuation became the real story. Not just what was left behind, but what kept moving forward long after the spotlight moved on. The realization didn't arrive as a headline moment. It unfolded slowly, almost indirectly, through reruns playing late at night, archived interviews resurfacing online, and quiet conversations inside entertainment circles that rarely reach the public surface. Robert Conrad's name, long associated with a different era of television, began to reappear not as a nostalgic reference alone, but as a focal point of something larger, a legacy that continued to generate attention, value, and curiosity long after his final appearance on screen. At first glance, it seemed simple: a successful actor from a golden age of television who built a respectable career and left behind a family connected to that history. But beneath that familiar surface was a far more intricate structure, one that reflects how long-term entertainment wealth actually functions. Because in Hollywood, True legacy is rarely about a single paycheck or even a single show. It is about what continues to exist after the cameras stop rolling. Residual rights, licensing agreements, syndication cycles, and intellectual property that never truly expires. And in Robert Conrad's case, those elements quietly accumulated over decades. What the public often overlooks is how television from earlier eras continues to circulate in global markets. A show that originally aired to millions decades ago can still generate income through international broadcasting rights, streaming platform licensing, and archival distribution deals. Each agreement may seem small on its own, but together they form a persistent financial current, one that does not disappear when fame fades. It simply changes form. For families connected to that legacy, this creates a different kind of reality. Wealth is no longer a single event or peak. It becomes a system, one built on continuity rather than visibility. Trust structures may hold rights to creative works. Legal frameworks determine how royalties are distributed. Estate planning ensures that intellectual property remains active, protected, and monetized across generations. And in this kind of structure, time itself becomes an asset. As observers began to take a closer look at Robert Conrad's long-term impact, the conversation quietly shifted. It was no longer just about his roles or his reputation as a television icon. It became about endurance, how a career from a past entertainment era could still produce measurable value in the present day. That endurance is what many people refer to, often loosely, as wealth beyond imagination. But in reality, it is less about sudden fortune and more about sustained relevance within the systems that keep content alive. Inside industry circles, this is not unusual. Many actors from the mid to late 20th century left behind catalogs of work that continue to circulate today. But what makes each case different is scale, timing, and how carefully rights were managed during and after their careers. Even small contractual decisions made decades ago can significantly affect how much value continues to flow forward. In that sense, legacy wealth is not just earned, it is structured. For Robert Conrad's family, this meant inheriting more than memories or fame. It meant inheriting participation in an ongoing system of value generation tied directly to his body of work. And while the public tends to imagine celebrity estates in terms of static numbers, the reality is more dynamic. These are living financial ecosystems, influenced by media demand, platform licensing trends, and continued cultural interest in classic television storytelling. Over time, this creates a perception gap. From the outside, people see recognition, nostalgia, and occasional tributes. From the inside, what exists is administration, management, and long-term stewardship. Rights are monitored, contracts are renewed, revenue streams are evaluated and redistributed. It is not glamorous, but it is consistent. And consistency in entertainment finance is often what builds lasting wealth. That is why discussions about Robert Conrad's family often take on a larger tone. They are not just about inheritance in the traditional sense. They are about continuity, how a single career can extend its influence across decades through systems designed to preserve and extend creative value. And as more of his work continues to circulate through modern platforms, that legacy does not fade. It compounds quietly in the background of an industry that never truly stops replaying its past. Because in entertainment, nothing disappears completely. It only changes audience, format, and time. And in that ongoing cycle, the legacy connected to Robert Conrad continues to exist, not as a static memory, but as an active, evolving structure that still moves forward long after the final scene was filmed. The deeper truth behind Robert Conrad's legacy doesn't sit in a single moment of fame or a dramatic headline about wealth. It sits in the long, almost invisible continuation of work that never truly stopped generating value. What appears to the public as a finished career is, in reality, an ongoing system, one that keeps moving quietly in the background of the entertainment industry long after the spotlight fades. When people hear phrases like rich beyond imagination, they often picture sudden fortune or explosive success. But in cases like this, the reality is far more structured and far less visible. It is built on decades of layered earnings, television contracts signed during the peak of broadcast-era Hollywood, residual agreements that continued paying out as reruns entered new markets, and licensing rights that allowed productions to live far beyond their original broadcast windows. Each of these elements may seem small in isolation, but together they form a long-term financial architecture that rarely breaks. Robert Conrad's career belonged to a generation of television that accidentally created something powerful: permanent content. Shows were not designed to disappear after a season. They were designed to be replayed, resold, and redistributed across networks, countries, and eventually digital platforms. That single shift in how entertainment was consumed changed everything for those who starred in it. It meant that every successful project had the potential to become a long-term asset instead of a temporary paycheck. And that is where the real story of his family's wealth begins. Not in a single inheritance moment, but in decades of continuation. Over time, as the industry evolved from broadcast television to cable syndication, and then to streaming platforms, older content found new life again and again. Each transition created new licensing agreements. Each agreement reopened revenue channels. And each channel fed into a system that quietly sustained the value of legacy content. For families connected to those works, this means a financial story is never fully closed. It simply enters new phases. But what the public rarely sees is how much management exists behind that continuity. Estates tied to entertainment legacies are not passive. They are active administrative systems. Intellectual property rights must be protected. Contracts must be reviewed.